Hey, well, some of you got on okay. That's great. Nice to see you. See a lot of familiar faces. Hi, Brian. It's been a while. Rick.
Catherine, good to see you.
Yeah. I see a lot of familiar faces. I kind of wanted to see everybody because I have some questions to ask. Because what I want to know is how many of you are familiar with the tritype concept? How many of you are comfortable with your tritype? All right. Yeah, one of the first things I'm going to cover is how important it is to have the right tritype. And in the very beginning, when I discovered tritype in 1994, I just went with the prevailing thoughts at the time that if you identified with a type, that was your type. But shortly thereafter, with this research, I discovered no, it isn't what we relate to. It's the actual idealized image, core fear, and defense strategy. You must have all three of those for your core type and the other two types in your tritype. So a lot of information was disseminated on tritype, not understanding how important that is. Why is it so important? Because those three idealized images, sets of idealized images, merge to create a very specific idealized image according to your tritype. And those three sets of key core fears merge to create your individual sensitivity to things on a mental, emotional, and visceral or physical level. And then the third factor that's essential is that you must use the defense strategy of the types you have in your tritype. So a lot of times, especially 9s and 6s, because they're meant to see the other side of every situation and all points of view, it takes them longer to land on their tritype. And the mistake they'll make is go with the situation at hand, the conditions. And that is definitely a part of their defense strategy. The problem is that it doesn't help getting the right tritype, because if you're looking at the situation, you're not looking at the overarching truth. What's true for you most of your life, most of the time, and every day, especially when you learn to bear witness to your own process, which all of us pretty much try to do with the Enneagram. So when you have 6 and 9 in the tritype, you're naturally going to identify with your heart type. And that's a common mistyping for those that are actually lead with 6 or 9. Now, you could lead with your heart type. That's a different story. But if you lead with your heart type, then you're going to be comfortable with it, but you're not going to really still maybe understand your head and heart if they're 6 and 9. Now, why is that the case? The most important thing to understand is that 3, 6, and 9, the primary triad, is meant to adapt and change depending on the circumstances. So the 3 adapts to have the best image and to be seen as having the best performance. So they'll change on a dime to show you their best self. And then the 6 changes according to who they're interacting with. So they'll be tough. They feel like they can and they need to be, or maybe they'll backpedal if they've come on a little too strong and they're met with resistance, but they will alter their behavior based on the conditions. And the same with 9. 9 sees all points of view, and so they don't want to really land on one, and so they don't commit to a particular point of view. Instead, they're comfortable with the kind of sense of consensus and what'll keep them in a positive rapport with people. So they might not say what they really think. Of course, 1 and 8 do, but 9 doesn't. 9's holding both. And the same in the heart center. 3 knows what their idealized image is, but they're going to change it. Whereas 2 and 4 do not change their idealized image. And then the same in the head center. 6 is trying to say, okay, what image will keep me safe? What thoughts, what viewpoint will be the best one I should use to be safe in the world? And we all want to be safe in the world, all 9 types. But the 7 has a very clear image of themselves, and so does 5. So 3, 6, and 9 are adjusting at all times. And when I first did this research, I asked people, once they knew their tritype, did it make a difference? Did they see qualities that they didn't see before? And a very large percentage, originally 80%, said yes, absolutely. And 20 to 25%, depending on the research, because I've done 24 studies now, said, no, I mean, it helps, but I kind of already related to the types in my tritype. So of course, I went to see what tritype people had, and all of them had the 3, 6, 9 in that 20 or 25%. And it makes total sense because 3, 6, and 9 already have access to all 9 types via their wings. And so it wouldn't be as eye-opening. Like David Daniels said, hey, as a 6, I always knew my lines to 9 and 3. He said, but tritype helped him as a 6 see that his gut type was really 1 and his heart type was 2. So he was actually a 6, 1, 2 or 6, 2, 1. They were very close for him. And I knew David Daniels really, really well. And he was there in the very beginning when I was sharing my research. And that's why he did that little mini video, if you've ever seen it, where he's talking about his tritype. But it does make a difference if you have a type in the tritype that is different from your lines of connection. And that's how this all emerged. So what I want to do today is just introduce what the symbol itself shows. Really want you to see it visually. But one thing that struck me when I learned the Enneagram and was working on understanding what tritype meant, I remembered my fascination with this Aristotle. He suggested that true internal harmony could only be achieved when those same internal conditions allow for each aspect of the psyche to perform what it's primitively meant to do. And we can look at the Enneagram and the subtypes and the tritypes is making us aware of the different facets of our personality on a primitive unconscious level. And when we are aware of them, we can achieve this conscious understanding of these biological imperatives. Now, when the Enneagram was first introduced in 1970, the theory was that it was largely based on nurture, because that was the trend in 1970, the shift from everything's nature and genetics to nurture, the environment in which we grew up in. But very quickly, it was easy to see when children were being born and then growing up that their type, if you knew how to type and you knew proto-analysis or other systems that helped you recognize the particular features and the use of the muscles, then you could see it really at birth if you had the training on microexpressions as well, which I did, and behavior analysis, which I did. And not that we can't change behaviors, but there's a way in which we observe the world and those muscles become more developed. So if we're constantly questioning or thinking about things, the pros and cons, then these muscles are developed. And so a lot of times you'll see 6s, where when they're thinking about something, they go, what? You're kidding. Well, I'm not so sure about that. And it's because they're just like if we work on our bicep, then it becomes bigger and more pronounced. Well, the same thing happens with all the features in our face. So those features really recognize more about type than we're even aware of, because types predictably use some emotions more than others. Whether we look at 6 or 7 emotions, because there are different theories on it, you can still see that we all use all emotions, but which do we use more? And that will show based on your type. So the Enneagram really lets us see what is more important to you than just your core type. Your core type is still the CEO of your tritype, but the CEO of your whole defense system is actually your instinctual stacking and the type at the top of the stacking. So that's what alerts us that something is wrong and in need of immediate attention. And it doesn't matter if it's real or imagined. So the unconscious nature of the human condition, we react according to our projections. So if we perceive something as dangerous, like if we're just anxious about maybe missing our flight because we didn't leave at the time we wanted to, and maybe we will miss the flight, maybe we won't. Being anxious doesn't help us get there faster, but it's a defense strategy that puts us on red alert, and then we act in accordance with that. Speeds up our adrenaline, our heart beats faster, and that's why understanding the types and the tritype really help people begin to recognize that. So what I want to introduce is the importance of the numerical value of the tritype and the geometric shape and where your tritype is in the Enneagram Tristar is what I call it. So originally I had found that every type, with this one here, that every type had something in common with every other type. Now, how do I know that? Is the best tests that were made in the very beginning, one of which was made by Don Riso. He took all the ways that types are similar, and then you had to choose between them in the long ready test. And then he carefully went through all these corresponding similarities and differences, and then came out with the pattern of the types you used. And if you look at the types, they do. Like if we look at 8, 9, and 1, what do they all share in common? They trust their gut. They're visceral. What do 2, 3, and 4 have? They trust their heart, what they're feeling. What's the rapport with the other person? And what's similar about 5, 6, and 7 is how they weigh and measure the truth of something and how they manage chaos. So I created this symbol and then distinguished it with the difference with tritype, which simply meant I remove the connections within the center. So when you're looking at tritype, you have one head type, one gut type, and one heart type. So the first symbol I used was just using the Y-shaped divisions for the centers and then a circle around your tritype. Now, Tristar. This is what I want you to see today, because if we integrate these qualities, we see more about our core type than we even understood. Now, the interesting thing is when you get it right, it's like a master skeleton key that can go in and open up things that you didn't realize were available to you. So for example, I'll go with my own because it's easy. Where is 4, 7, 8 in here? 4, 7, 8, that tritype sits on 0.4. Now, what do 4s always say about themselves? That they're creative. Now, there are 3 types that are creative, and it's 4, 7, and 8. So it's very logical that the 4, 7, 8 would be at the 4 position. But what does that mean? It means a 7 with this tritype is uber creative, as is an 8. And so our strength is that we have creative problem solving. We see things in new and novel ways, and we get things done, but we have a particular viewpoint. And then you just need to know what type is in the lead. Now, conversely, the type that's exactly the opposite of the 4, 7, 8, which is conforming by the book, doing things as they should, is the 1, 3, 6 right here. So once you learn the correct tritype, you'll also learn the tritype you have the last access to, which lets you know, in a way, who complements you in their abilities and perspectives, but who might be a little frustrating because they don't see things the way you do. But we all have complements and we all have combinations. So the key thing here is that not only am I in the 3 sector, even though I'm an 8, I am a 1. So if you add 4 and 7 and 8, 8 and 7 is 15, and 4 makes 19, and then you take that double digit and reduce it to a single digit. And so 1 plus 9 is 10. So 1 plus 0 is 1. So I am, as a tritype, a can-do person, because in the Enneagram symbol, I'm an 8. But when I work on something or care about something, I'm going to have a lot of values we associate with starting, with the first urge, with initiating. And if you've seen my video on the archetypes of the types according to what 1 brings, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you understand every point is important. So the first point is that first urge, type 1, then nurturing whatever the urge was. So let's say the first urge was, we need more food, we need to plant more trees to take care of the community or the individual, either way. We have to have the nurturing of those plants for them to come to fruition. So they have to have water, they might need shade, they might need protective barriers or things that will keep off the insects that could harm the tree. So nurturance is essential. Then the third element is production. So in order to have these trees or tree, then you need to have this ability to have many trees. And so the 3 is about producing. And then the 4 is about really that individuation and specialization. So point 4 is meant to specialize and to create, it's the first break from standardized. And that's why sometimes 4s are saying, oh, 3s are so commonplace. But actually, 3s are doing what is universally needed as a primary type. And then 4 is meant to say, wait a minute, you need to go with quality, with expertise, with specializing. So the 4 is saying, okay, you've got this orchard of trees, but only some of them have fruit that tastes good. And so that's what they're going to be focused on, exclusivity and those dynamics. And so you can see if specialization happens at point 4 in the Enneagram of process, it's like this for you, then you can understand why the 4, 7, 8 would be the perfect tritype that matches that. But as I said, the most important thing, these 9 tritypes that are coming off of the 3, regardless of what the tritype is, they are initiators of their particular combination. Some we would expect. All the types with 3 in them, we think, oh, they should all be in that triad. They're not. This is the beauty of the unfolding process. And that's how it all begins with 3, 6, 9 and I'll go into that more in a moment, just in the continuation of the Enneagram process to understand why these positions are so critical, is that the 5 is the position not of identifying the most ideal trees, but instead classification and the beginning of protection, which means if you think of any really extraordinary book that has every reference you could want, it will be 9 times out of 10 created by a 5, whether it's botany or the animal kingdom, all those variables of what constitutes a particular type. A lot of the early creators of those systems of reference were 5s. They have a natural inclination to pay attention to that kind of detail and to want to assemble it, to have it thorough and complete. In particular, it's the 1-4-5, just for those of you who want to know, which is up in the integrating tritypes and the exemplar of the 1. So the 5 is classifying and then storing what's needed. And then the 6 is saying, okay, wait, now how do we distribute this fruit tree or the pears from the fruit tree fairly, evenly? And they're also guarding. So regulation is what is important for the 6. They like regulation. If they're going to deviate from regulation, that's their choice, but they don't like other people to deviate from it because they want to know what to expect. And then in the terms of this analogy, they're often guarding that storehouse and giving everyone their fair share. And that's why it's so important for 6s and why we need 6s in every community, because they want things to be judicial. They want fairness, and they want people to come together and acknowledge what's needed in the way of fairness. The 1 starts the idea that we need to be fair and just, and we need a system that'll make that happen. But it's the 6 that wants it implemented in a way that, in essence, is justice for all. And if you know about the early teachings from Machazo and Naranjo, 6 is the point of how you observe others. That 3 is the point of what you need to do. Who are you, or who am I in the case of the 3? And what do I need to do to stand out? What do I need to achieve? My achievements make me valuable and keep me safe. And then the 6 is, okay, what do I need to defend to be safe? What is fair? How do I know who's fair, who isn't? And it's like, what are other people doing? So you don't have to be a social to be aware of what other people are doing. 6s are always aware. And so are 5s and 7s, by the way, the whole head center. Having said that, the 7 is saying, okay, we've all got our fruit trees, they're classified, they're organized, we've determined the most ideal tree. Now we're using that criteria determined by the type 5 to plant future trees, but we need to actually enjoy and create a celebration around what we've accomplished. And point 7 is bringing others together in a positive environment. And so the 7 is wanting to set the kind of like after there's a harvest and then you have a festival or you enjoy it and you all share, you break bread together. There's usually food and anything of this nature. So if we're talking about a group or a tribe, often we'll have a potluck. People bring food, and then or if we're hosting the event ourselves, then we're providing food. It's very rare for an event not to have something that brings people together. And whether it's just drinks or appetizers or food, it's historically true in all cultures in one way or another. So 7 is celebration, and then also saying, well, how can we optimize this? So optimization begins at point 3 and is implemented in a new way with new ideas at point 7. And then at point 8, it's consumption. It's like, okay, let's just eat the fruit already. Okay, we're having a great time, but where's the fruit? And let's also seek protection. Now, this is the difference between 6 and 8. 6 wants to defend what is right and what they believe should happen. But the 8 is far into the future, because the point of future is 7 and 8 is beyond that, only looking at vulnerabilities. So it's like, wait, we've got this storehouse and we have the protection for those that might take more than their fair share. But what about these marauding tribes that come through and would take our storehouse of food? We need to have scouts noticing what's going on at the perimeter. So that's why 8s are looking at the big picture of what is safe and what needs to be planned for, whereas the 6 is looking for how they are going to make sure things are safe in their immediate environment. So 9 is really an interesting point, because in a 9-fold system, everything begins and ends with type 9. So in order to have that first urge, there has to be the move out of type 9, which is harmonizing, whole, and complete, and move to the first urge. We need more food. We need to improve a system. We need to do something that needs to go into action. And then after it's all completed at point 8, and let's say consumption happens at point 8, then at point 9 is what? It's assimilation, it's digestion, it's completing that process. And if you know with animals that one animal could eat something with a seed and then later eliminate it a mile away, and then a tree or a fruit or whatever it is, a little seed bearing, usually trees, someplace else, and then it propagates a larger area. So everything, you'll see it everywhere in the world. But what I want you to see about this image is that this actual beginning of 369 is the core of everything we talk about with the Enneagram. So the first thing you need to know is that 9 is the center and breaks into these 3 in this triangle. But having said that, 8 and 1 are just mutants of type 9. I'm just a mutant 9. Instead of waiting and measuring what I should do, I take immediate action. If it doesn't work, I change it later. No big deal. I'd like to get it right in the very beginning, but I know I'll want to make it right, and I won't argue with something that's better. I'll implement it later. But the 8 feels that immediate need to take an action. Then 1, on the other hand, says, wait a minute, I need to do some research. I need to check it out to make sure what needs to happen, and then offer it as an opportunity to do something, as a possibility. And, as a well thought out possibility with due diligence. So that takes time. And then the 9 is saying, well, wait, do I do it immediately or do I wait and I get the details? Well, it'll work its way out and we'll see what happens. And then if nothing happens, then I'll move in. But there's an openness to consensus at point 9 for that reason. So then when we look at 2, 3, and 4, 2 and 4 are mutant 3s. They have the same dilemma because they're in the same triad, but they're a specialized version. So the 3 is saying, yeah, I got to perform. I won't have value if I don't perform and achieve something admirable. The 2 says, I can create that by creating rapport with others, and no one can create immediate rapport better than a 2 or someone with 2 in the Tritype. And they can initiate welcome, welcome wagons or 2s. They're the most welcoming Tritype of all is the 278, just to give you a point of perspective. So each Tritype that's in this outer star is like the most specialized version of the triad they're in. And then if we look at the head types, 6 being the core and noticing others, 5 and 7 are just mutants on 6. 6 is trying to hold both, but the 5 is saying, I need to stand back and observe without being observed. And what does that mean? That means I won't have any interference. If people know I'm observing, then what happens? They could say, why are you doing that? Why are you staring at that person? And that would be uncomfortable. Even when they were children and they might study a little bug or something they didn't quite understand, they'd give it a lot of attention. This is where 8 and 5 are similar. You'll see it in the eyes. They're penetrating eyes. They're looking through things. They're looking at details. And of course, 8 and 5 have aligned to each other in the standard Enneagram. Enneagram just means 9 points. So anything with 9 points is still an Enneagram. But that's why I call it Tristar, just because it looks more like a star. But the 5, as opposed to the 7 is saying, well, rather than a singular view based on all the data, I want the view that will enable me to see all possibilities and have the diversity, the variety, and they know that they can comfortably create rapport with those they want to create it with, which is why the most rapport-driven type, the 278, why 7 would feel that way. And 8 says, hey, I think people are interesting. Yeah, I like what you're saying. Yeah, you're great. Hey, I'm great. We're both great. On second thought, you're not so great. Neither am I. But it's the changing element. It's arrogant pride. The 8 is just very flippant and easy to say something's great and then diminish it and mean nothing by it. And all types, when they're coming from their average level, are reasonably enjoyable. In fact, most are very enjoyable. Coming from the high side of our type, we're very nice to deal with and interact with. The low side of our type, all the types are kind of difficult. We really don't like any of them when they're coming from their low side. But the way to understand how that low side will kick up is through this Tristar map. So I want to say one more thing before I go to the variables, that what happens is you begin with the 369, which adds up to 9. The 147 adds up to 3, and 258 adds up to 6. So it's not by chance that the integrating types are at 0.9 or the initiating types are at 0.3. So 1, 4, and 7 adds up to 3. So there is a mathematical logic to all this. It isn't like I made it up. What I can say is that when I gave people in 1994, which I'd been doing since 1985 when I first made the chart, I should back up a little. In the 80s, when I was an executive in the cosmetic industry, at the end of my career, the last few years of my career, I was given a position where I handled problems. So my boss in the US was a 478. So he liked what I did. I made him look good. And the boss of the international perspective that had Lancôme, L'Oreal, and all the other companies associated with Lancôme was an 874. So when he met me and he saw the way I handled things and all the typologies I knew, because the 478 said, oh, you need to talk to Chernick. She can read anybody. She knows what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and she knows all these ways to talk to them. Now, I didn't know the Enneagram yet, but I knew many, many typologies. So at that point, because those two men that had the same tritype, especially the guy that didn't know me very well, the 874, he recognized himself and he put me in charge of all problems where orders weren't passed. And then I would go in and use all my skills as a 478 and say, okay, I'm here to negotiate a win-win outcome. And they go, oh no, you're not going to get us to pass orders. We're overstocked. And I'd look through every book and I'd made a list. Okay, this is what you're overstocked in, and you can't do interstore transfers. Then what I want to do is create ads for those products at Lancôme's expense. They go, oh, really? You can do that? Yeah, because the 874 gave me full authorization to do exactly what I wanted, the way I wanted, because he knew his own style of working with things. And the 478 understood that as well. So it was very copacetic. And I wanted a win-win as an 8. And I didn't want to just like force things on them because I didn't think it was fair that they had a salesman from Lancôme that had not been better at recognizing what was needed and had oversold them. So that's the first thing I did. And I said, and I'll come back in a month or 2 months, whatever you prefer, and I'll create an event for your account only, your flagship store. They go, really? And what would you do it on? I said, well, since we're kind of overstocked in these items, it'll be like a little spa. And then I'd take over the furniture department and set up, chairs like I have here. And then people get the products on their face. And then I'd look at their coloring and then because I knew color theory, give me a system, any system, and I knew it. And tell them which shades in Lancôme worked, and then have trained the makeup artists. And then they would have their makeup done based on their colors. And that's what the 874 thought was so ingenious, because you could handle any problem if you do that. And it was extraordinary, but I would modify it for the accounts. So that's creative problem solving. Was I good at the detail? Could I write an order well? No, I'd have to add it 3 times. I have a type of dyslexia where I transpose letters and numbers. But the gift of that dyslexia is pattern recognition. So I saw in that very first 500 people that I did the research with that immediately jumped another 1,000 or 1,200 after I went to the Stanford conference. So then we were up to almost 2,000 people. And then I kept going. And I've never stopped, to tell you the truth. But what I noticed is that I gave them a questionnaire, one of several. But the one that was so key was what I call the Enneagram type sorter. And I had organized the idealized images and core fears of the types by type, but I started with 2. So I had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1. And what that did is I told people to choose 3 types and put them in order. And if that was hard, put all 9 in order. And I was amazed. Every single person had a type from each center. That's statistically really meaningful, because they could have chosen 3 types in a center, or 2 in one center and 2 in another, and 1 center empty, but they didn't. And then when I did the 3-hour in-depth inquiry process, I discovered they actually had the defense strategy and more on the idealized image and the core fear of the type. Now, why was that so meaningful? It's because when I worked for Lancôme and I was meeting these divisional managers, department managers, display managers, I involved the whole store. And I would say, hey, I'm doing this research. We're hiring and training the people that will be working this event. And I need every type of role. So I went to shipping. I went to every department. and people outside of the department, people who worked for other companies, but as many as I could to fill out that one-page questionnaire. So when you take my test at EnneagramTritypeTest.com, those first questions are critical for understanding what first comes up. So if you take that test, don't go look on a thesaurus. Don't take your time on it. Think of what immediately comes up for you, and you'll get the best result. The test is working again, by the way. I got the guy who created it to rescue me, or it's working soon. He's working on it as we speak. But so really, we begin with the 3-6-9, and then it's variations on theme. So the first variation from 3-6-9 is to go to 3-7-9 and 2-6-9. So that's why they're in this first mutation out. So we begin with 3 primary types, and then slowly we are adding the hexad types, the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, until all permutations have been met. And those are the 27. Now it goes on forever, just like the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. It's infinite. But this first round that's so meaningful can be seen in the Tristar, and the concentric circles let you know how early your tritype came into being. And the types in the outer stars are the rarest. So the most common is 3-6-9, and then 2-5-8 and 1-4-7, because those were the first triads we used. So it was all always there, and it shows a wonderful variation on theme. And that's why we have the 1-4-6 over in the opposing tritypes. And the 1-4-6 might say, well, wait, I'm just trying to get it right. Why wouldn't I be over by the 1? Because they don't integrate. Instead, they're calling off what needs to improve. It's 3 types that are focused on critiquing situations. So they're actually opposing what is not done in a proper way or in a way that they feel is correct. But how do they accomplish that? They're a 2 within the opposing triad. They're critiquing, but they're trying to create rapport at the same time. And they see everything as more beneficial with another. And if you know any 1-4-6s in any order, 6-4-1, 4-1-6, 1-4-6, they always like to have a counterpart that they can bounce things off of. But they may mistype as a 1 or a 4 at first. But what triad are they in? A lot of times when I'm doing the typing sessions, you could have one of the rare combinations and be in as a tritype in a center that makes you appear different from others. And since I know MBTI, I can understand those nuances where people are really a particular example, like the 4-5-8 is one of them. They will baffle people that are using MBTI and trying to go with standardized ideas of what types have what MBTI. And you have to look at tritype, and then you get the specifics. Notice that the 4-5-8 is an 8 on the 8 line. They are the most exact example of an 8. Now, we think it's 2-5-8 because that was one of the early triads. But if you go with what's actually going on with the tritype, it's 4-5-8 in any order. It's triple arrogant, it's triple confident in their viewpoint. And they are, as Russ Hudson said, Don used to say he was like an intellectual pit bull. And this tritype is, they know what they think, they're consistent about it, they will share it. And then people say, that person can't be a 5, they're too overt. Or, oh, that person can't be a 4, they're too opinionated and outspoken. Where's that shy, sensitive, self-absorbed? It's still there, but the tritype means that when they feel that energy ignited. They disagree with something, they're going to assert their viewpoint. They're like mental 4-6-8. Well, the 4-6-8 is over here in the opposing triad, and they have 9. So they're going to see the opposite or what's missing, but they're going to want immediate resolution. So the 9 says, yeah, let's integrate it. Let's get to peace and resolution. The thing is, not everything can be resolved immediately. And that's why 4-6-8 struggle on an emotional level. Well, the 4-5-8 is saying, yeah, if we just get the facts, we'll know what's the right answer or the better answer, really. And then the same if we go over here, as I mentioned, the 2-7-8 on the other hand is, wait, we don't need to be defined by any borders or boundaries. Let's just pursue what we're interested in. So it's the most hedonistic, fun-loving, free-flowing tritype, and that's why they chose the free spirit. 4 is a free spirit as well, but we feel a sense of discipline that they don't have. And the 4-7-8 is going to disseminate whatever they've learned. If it's to their friends, their colleagues, their extended family, everyone will know what they've found. And that's why they all agreed on the messenger. Some of us liked catalysts or other words, but then we thought, okay, anyone with 4 might choose that. So we agreed on messenger. And the names evolved very early on because people were used to names being associated with the types. But what was challenging is getting people that were accurately trityped. But once I had enough people that were accurately trityped, I could bring them together via email before there was Zoom, before there was Skype, and ask them what word they would like. And then I brought them together and okay, these are the words. What could you agree on? Then it would go back out. So as an 8, the way I do things is I do it more like an 8 than a 5. I go out, 8-7. I go to the broader world, extroverted ENTP. Everything fascinates me and I love change and dynamics. I want to talk about it. I find it important. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, that combination. Now, all 4-7-8s are not ENTPs, but there's more ENTPs in 4-7-8 than anywhere else. They can also show up with 6s, but they're more argumentative if they have 6 because they're in the opposing triad. Like the only 6 in the initiating triad is the 1-3-6. So often they're the 3-6-8s. A lot of the definitions of the ENTP match 3-6-8. And yet 4-7-8 has more ENTPs than anyone. And then if we go up here, there'll be a 4-5-8 that says, I'm really an ENTP, but I'm introverted, so I must be the INTP. But often that introversion and extroversion are very close. But it's how do you go outward, or do you just follow your own gathering of the data? And that's a little bit more the 5. But if the 5 wants information, they'll methodically go about gathering it. In fact, 5s throughout my years with the Enneagram, which is 40 years now, would go all over the internet and gather data of things I said in different places and put it together, which I really appreciated because I didn't remember what I'd said. But 5s have that natural inclination to want to gather all the nuggets and see the common denominators. So everything is meaningful, and I love tritypes. And I decided to take 4.0, which was where I did the 28 weeks on the tritype. So I did 1.0 with all the basic concepts and even the patterns that you can look at and how the numbers unfold in 1.0. And then in 2.0, I went into relationships with the tritypes. And those were both 10-week classes. And then I decided that people really wanted to just know about their own tritype. So I spent the 3 hours on everything that pertained to the tri-type. And then I knew very much that people didn't want to have to buy the whole course if they weren't teaching, and that they would want to just see about their own. And so last December, I introduced them as separate videos. They're on sale right now. Actually, they're $20 off for those of you that might be interested. But that's not going on very long because it's a flash sale and I'm not sure. You can always go to the product and then click on it and see what you get from it. But I look at it from every perspective imaginable. Your idealized images, your core fears, your defense strategies, your passion, fixation, and conviction, your holy idea, your holy virtue, and your holy action. And what the type said about themselves. In other words, I don't actually write anything that hasn't been said by the types themselves. And sometimes that's a little kind of boring, but it's specific. So I didn't, I thought, oh, well, I should try AI. It'd be really great. And I could expand more, but it takes you away from the core issue of the tri-type. So you won't see me doing that because all my charts and everything are meant to show you these specifics and why, for example, a 127 is the 7 that's kind of opposing the status quo. Well, they're more rebellious because they're over in the opposing triad. It's the only 7 in the opposing triad. They make great teachers for that reason. So everything is meaningful. A lot of times people will meet a 479, for example, and they'll be so receptive. They're also a 2, so they're looking for the other. So if you meet a 479 in person, you think, oh, they're a 9, because you feel so received by them. You can have a 4 with this tri-type, but everyone will want to tell them they're a 9. But what's happened is they're coming right off the 369, and they're in the integrating tri-type. And it is by far and away, the 479 is the most receptive tri-type of all 27 because of the 3 types coming together. 7 and 9 want peace, harmony, positivity, ease, and comfort. And the 479 wants depth with that. So they can look like other tri-types, whereas 459 is coming right off the 9. And they're organized around, they have double arrogance with the 4 and 5, strong in what they believe, but 9 wants it harmonious. So they hold back a little, but they want people to invite them, to include them. In fact, I've shared with this that secretly, they're kind of easily contemptuous of people who don't ask their opinion. And how do I know that? It's the micro expression of contempt. They don't mean anything by it. But if they feel like shy, but they know what they're talking about, and someone hasn't said, hey, 459 or 954 or 549, what do you think about this? Then they feel kind of overlooked and not valued. And they think that people that are extroverted should be inviting them in. At first, though, they don't realize that extroverts can talk because they're afraid the connection's going to break. And it doesn't mean they're not anxious. It doesn't mean they're more confident than the 459. It's a pacing issue. The 459 wants the moment to think about it and then add the contribution that's meaningful. And 279 is uber gentle and positive, but they don't want any conflict. 379 is like the ambitious 279. A lot of times, people that are 379s or 973, it's the ambitious 9 that's easygoing, but gets the job done and executes the results. So I will do a lot of this in the 3-week course, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what these triads, which become the tri-types, are actually focused on. So I wanted to show you some of the early pieces. I went through what each center relates to, but it's important to understand that anxiety belongs to the head center, but having people not understand the difference between mental chaos and anxiety and emotional anxiety. The emotional anxiety is your heart because you're feeling it as a pang to the heart. And then the feeling of shame arises, or not being enough, or not being seen in a way that will keep you safe. And then the gut types, it's focused on kind of those visceral instincts. And anger is, do you move or do you not move? And so it's based on our actions, our physical actions. But that includes not doing anything, like 9. So do we go into what we need to, or do we avoid it? It's still part of the gut center. So then the numerical value I explained. So just really these interactions become important. And the geometric shape I'm going to show you at the end because they're not random either. And I didn't create the shape. It's coming from the Enneagram, and you can just see the interconnectedness. But that's why you have to get the right tritype, because if you're in the wrong tritype, then you're not seeing that skeleton key. And like when my work was first disseminated, people that were very enthusiastic, which of course I love because it was so transformational to my clients, to me, to everyone I knew, and I wanted everyone to have it, but they didn't understand the criteria for determining the right tritype. They didn't understand the idealized image, the core fear, or the defense strategy. Like I will interview people that have booked a session with me, and I'll do the in-depth inquiry, and they really want to be, let's say, a 4 or an 8 or a 1, a type other than what they are. And in the interview, I can get around the superego and see what their emotions are saying, and then ask questions based on those expressions, as opposed to how do you experience anger in your life? How do you experience perfection in your life? Because those, to me, are leading questions. Like, you're going to get someone focused on your question rather than what naturally emerges. But once you get around the superego, you can see things that supersede someone's idea of what they think they value. So there might be a split, like if they're answering something, their face might say they don't believe it, but they may not know that. And so it's really helpful at that point to then ask questions that help ascertain what those specifics are. Maybe they agree with part of what they're saying, but not another part. And so I can do this inquiry to find out why it's split. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It just reveals your type. So once you understand it, then you can see these interactions in your own process, and you can begin to map it. And then obviously this helps with our challenges and gives us opportunities to take those very same challenges and see them as ways to expand our awareness. And implementing the change can only happen with the right tritype again. So like on Personality Cafe, for example, which was very early to share my findings on the site, someone put my whole book and the little charts on my book on there. And someone maybe new to the Enneagram who didn't really understand it's not the type you think you are, but what you're actually using, might say, I'm that tritype and I don't do that. And then they would take the whole list of the 27, repost it, and then change what I wrote. So it looked like it came from me, but they didn't cite me anymore. But 99.9% had still come from me, but there were additions that I would never teach because they aren't true of the tritype. And so that naturally happened. And that was the onset of the internet. And I really know that it happened by accident, But unfortunately, people started misunderstanding some of the Tritypes, and they went with their idealized idea of what the type should be like. And it's not that, it's the merge of the three types. So if you get three Tritypes that are focused on doing things the right way, being efficient, being thorough and diligent, like a 1-3-5, it amplifies that Tritype of needing to do things in that specific manner. Just like if you get the 2-7-9, you have three types that want easy relating. So they're totally a rainbow type. The 2-7-9 and the 3-7-9 are always seeing things from the rosy perspective, and it's not by chance. So if you don't get the three types correct in the beginning, you're not going to relate to your Tritype. And what I noticed is the changes that people made innocently were because they were actually a different Tritype. And usually it meant they didn't recognize that they had 6 in the Tritype. So why oppose it anyhow? Well, that's what 6s are meant to do. They're meant to oppose things that don't seem right to them. So to me, it was a master understanding of the types, but they didn't know enough. The people that made the changes had not taken a course and understand the differing views. And in all fairness to everybody, until you understood the way Achazo introduced the types and the way Naranjo understood the types with his additions of the he added to the buckets of type, the psychological perspectives. But as he said, he was guesstimating based on all the research that had been done. So he loved Karen Horney, for example. So he put, like, which types are aggressive? Oh, yeah, that would be type 8, and that'd be type 7, and it would be type 3. So that aggression on some level went into those three types, but he modified it to match the type. And then he looked at Sheldon's body types and he said, okay, who has which body type? And he put those in the buckets. Those didn't come from Achazo. All of that work came from Naranjo expanding Achazo's work. So you need to understand what Achazo meant, what they kind of collaborated on for a short period of time, and then what each man did independent of the other, where they went with their work. And Achazo went into systems, and Naranjo went into the psychological perspective of how to break the suffering of the type. And that's what Achazo wanted as well. So both were doing that. But when they were doing their own work, they went about it in a totally different way. And I had the good fortune to spend 10 days with Naranjo, and he was willing to see my research because he liked my research that had been published on the Enne style, which is the image, self-projection, and style of each type, what we value. And he really liked the words and the vocabulary and the lexicons. So when I was in his class, he'd asked to see my research, so I brought it. And he was really pleasantly surprised because he had not been given credit for creating the instincts, the subtypes. Instinctual triads were Achazo. Naranjo changed those to centers of intelligence. So that gets confusing to people, but Naranjo did it out of respect for Achazo to not violate his copyright. So when he saw what happened with the qualitative research, and Naranjo was a researcher. He had a Fulbright scholarship to Harvard and worked with the personality studies there. He first went to Ohio State and worked there, and they were the leading university doing personality research. And then he ended up in Berkeley and worked at a number of research centers on personality. So he really knew personality and could add so much to the Enneagram. And he was pleased that my research identified the kind of the lexicon, because that came out in his research, which none of us really knew about. And I didn't meet him till 1996 and learned a whole lot about the types that were not disseminated. And I have an article that I wrote about him in that intensive because there were so many things unknown that most of us know now, but it's worth reading if you don't. And it's called Reflections on Type. And you can get it on at katherinefauvre.com. If you scroll down the right column, I have my blogs, and you can just type in, Naranjo or reflections, and it'll come up. So there are a lot of things that Naranjo kind of made known, but because he had not taught for almost 24 years. So his first teachings were then kind of stalled because of the conflict over using the Eureka material and people not honoring the confidentiality agreement. So he waited, and so did many others, to publish. As a result, he didn't publish till like 1994, his first book. As a result, people that wrote the first books never studied with Naranjo or Echazo. So they didn't know what they didn't know. And so it filled in so many gaps for me and what wasn't taught. And I had 3 certifications at the time. So I knew what Don and Rusty taught. I knew what Helen and David taught, and what Ted and Kathy, the 3 original certification programs you could be in. And then my research. So then when I found all these things, then Naranjo validated it. And so that was great. And so when he taught that class, we included my work on the instincts and then his views of the 27. And then that came up with the core definitions. But there were core definitions out there that he hadn't approved. So you might see they're a little different. And I know I promised the updated books, and the subtype book is nearly ready. We just have to get the proof and make sure that it will be the way you want it. If it was just a PDF, it would be easy, but I'm trying to make it so if you want the physical copy. So I'm going to introduce the subtype book because there's so much advanced material in there and charts. And I'm working with a wonderful man that has made all these charts so that it's easy to see everything, because I'm not so good with technical or any of that, but he's made that possible. And then I decided it needed to be the accurate history. So I had to do a lot more research, not just what I knew, but like seeing exactly where things came from and whom. So that's what slowed me down, and some health challenges, but they will be out soon. I promise you. It just was a little complicated time period. So back to this image. It's fairly new. It's when I was really looking at how they unfolded mathematically. Now, I did have some early beginnings, and let me show you. When I worked with Naranjo, I understood the way he saw the centers, the mental, emotional, and physical. When he came up with the idea of subtypes, he noticed that there were holy ideas and holy virtues, but there wasn't anything for the gut. So he put the 3 instincts here in the gut center. But I found with my research that what was missing was not something in the gut. It's that it's the domain of holy actions. Now, what you need to understand to make sense of this is that when the Enneagram was first disseminated, it only had the virtues, the passions and the virtues, and those were universal with all teachings. And what became distinctive was that I found what the issues were, and Naranjo validated what I found, which was great. And then over time, I said, yeah, these are 4 different things. There are the 3 centers and then the 3 instincts underneath it. And what Naranjo had done is very important. And that is, he took Echazo's 3 triads, the way he described the gut, which is conservation, the heart, which is relation, and the head, which is adaptation. But at one point, he had syntony at the heart and syntony at the head. But then at the time of his death, he was consistent with conservation, which is like self-pres, and then relation, like building that rapport and relations with others. And then the head, of course, is like, what do you need to know or learn to be safe in the world? And what gives you reassurance? Like for a 5, what gives them reassurance is the knowledge that they can find and research and come across and amass to make sense of things. Whereas a 6, it might just be a nice person that's reassuring you that they'll help you out if you have a problem. So if you understand that conservation, relation, and adaptation were put under each Enneagram type as these 3 variables, it did not interfere with those 3 triads. So let me just highlight the fact that Echazo never taught integration, disintegration, and neither did Naranjo. That was a mistake and went out through the Jesuit line, and we all talk about it, but it's not true in the way it's taught, meaning you still can disintegrate, but your whole system disintegrates. So that means your type, your wings, and your lines disintegrate as well. And when you're doing well and you're coming from your high side, it's all integrated. You, your wings, your lines. Now people say, but aren't we one wing over the other? No, that was also a misunderstanding. Now we can identify with one wing more than another, but to be your type is the tension between the wings, because the Enneagram is an Enneagram of process. So to be a 3, you're leaving the issues of 2 and moving to a broader audience before you go inward into 4 and individuate. So it's a process, but you might say, I identify more with the 2. One thing that Dawn taught early on, and Dawn and Russ together, was to say, imagine little connecting dots here. And where were you if you were a 3 on the dots? More here, right between 2 and 3, or between 3 and 4? It was very clever because we do have these identifications, but we always have both. And again, if we're coming from the high side, we're really enjoyable to be around. And if we're coming from the low side, we're all a mess. So the first image that I created with a friend was this one. And what it stuck out immediately is in this unfolding, like the variations of these 2, the variations of the 258, there are these, the variations on the 147, 359, 136, was that looking down at the tritype, you could immediately see the first tritypes we found. Now, the 147, the 369, and 258 were always there. People just didn't realize it. But if you look at coming off the 3 line, this would all be 3 over here. This would all be 6, and this is all 9 up here, is that the 135, the 279, and the 468 are the harmonics. So it's natural that we would see their similarities. And then what we recognized very quickly, actually before the harmonics, was the Hornadians. And those of us that studied Horne, I studied Horne in high school because she was a leading figure on feminism. She was countering Freud and seeing the same issues for women with men and men with women and what have you. Cassandra and the complexes that occurred not just with men, but women envious of men and men envious of women, that they were balanced. So those of us that knew Horne kind of had a dispute. I remember I think it was 1994 at the conference, that first Enneagram conference, where we kind of were talking about it. And most people were saying, oh, the 3 aggressive types were the 3, 7, and 8. Excuse me. And another type was saying, no, the 3 aggressive types are 8, 1, and 3. And they didn't know the centers or the significance of trialectics. And I said, well, if we go by Echazo's view, and that's what we're looking at, we have to go with trialectics. which means there's one type per center. So then the people that were fixated on one being angrier or more assertive than 7 said, oh, okay, if I have to do it by center, all right, 8 wins over 1, 7 wins over 6 and 5, and 3, no one disputed. But that was pretty early. By 1995, most of us were in agreement on that. And it's understandable if you didn't really understand the critical factors of the centers themselves, you could make that mistake. But doing the unfolding and seeing the way these stood out as the direct line off, so this would be the 3 line, and this would be the 6 line, and this would be the 9 line, to me was not random. I love patterns, and it was just too consistent. It wasn't like coming off at this angle. It's coming off specifically at the 3, 6, and 9. Then I knew that it needed to have a way to see it according to the 9 types. And that's when I came out with the first Tristar that I called the Triclaw, because it kind of looks more like claws. But it's the same as what I showed you without the centers separating it and without you recognizing what type it is. But this is still 0.9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and back to 9. It's just another way of seeing it. But people had a little trouble with it until they really knew all the Tritypes. And so I said, okay, you just need to see the name and the numerical value to understand more about your Tritype. So then Val made this image for me so that when I teach, people could see more about it. And it does help to see the names. I really get that, because I like seeing the names. And then you see all the variables going around. And what many people don't realize is that if we look at the original symbol, everything is numerical with the Enneagram. So if you add 8 and 1, it equals 9. If you add 7 and 2, it equals 9. If you add 6 and 3, it equals 9. 5 and 4 equals 9. And then adding the lines, if you add 1 and 2 with 4, what do you get? You get 7. And you just keep going. Everything means something, and you see the unfolding just in the basic Enneagram of the 9 types itself. So all Tritype is doing is going beyond that. Now, I wanted everybody to have this chart, if you don't have it already, which shows you the idealized image and core fears. And this is what I later added. Like when this chart was first created was when I was in the fashion industry, just dealing with 1,000 people under me. And then I got many, many, many of those any style questionnaires because of that. But when I learned the Enneagram, I thought, wow, these perfectly match. And then that's when I added pride with, so you know what is happening. And you'll, if someone doesn't then display the defense strategy, like if they think they're a 4 and they don't have interjection as a dilemma, and you have to understand what those mean, then, or it's minor, then it means it's probably in 3rd position in their Tritype. And if you don't have vanity as an issue, you can be like vain kind of on a biological level. They've recognized that they can see it in the DNA or like the warrior gene and empathy, but they look at kind of different qualities to recognize that. So for example, I have the warrior gene, but I also have the high empathy gene, and that's sensitivity. Now, for some people, sensitivity makes them self-conscious. For other people, sensitivity makes them more aware of the feelings of others. And they reference it in terms of childhood. So childhood intelligence. So I have high childhood intelligence, but I also have high propensity for my DNA to have learning differences, which in school are disabilities. But if you add the high IQ, no one ever knew I had dyslexia because I had my systems of figuring things out. And it was more that I just had to read things over a few times instead of skipping lines. So you'll notice I put everything in boxes and delineate. And I think everyone learns that better, but I have to have it that way because of my dyslexia. So I'm chart crazy. So here's a way to look at the core fears and what Tritype tells you. So if you see your own Tritype, you'll recognize those fears. If you don't have the fear, you're not that type and you need to look for a different type in that center. So this is one I want to give you as well. So if we just isolate the 4, 7, and 8, it's whatever type you lead with. In my case, it's 8, excess. Yeah, I have over 1,000 PowerPoint slides just on Tritype alone. And whatever I do, I overdo. But I want all the variations, 7. I want a lot of what I want, that's 8. And I have duplicates of some things which take up space on my computer, but you never know, it could get contaminated. And just in case, and sure enough, just recently, I lost a whole PowerPoint. I go, then again, I'm excessive. I have another one somewhere, and then I could go find it. And I also could make a mistake. So having many variations is just normal for me. But the 7 has the gluttony, and it can be mental gluttony. So I physically want everything to never be disempowered. And then mentally, I have that, intellectual gluttony, more. Like my son is an 8, but he's an 8-6. He doesn't have the same gluttony for data and details that I have. I mean, 8 has a natural line to 5 and 5 to 8. And a 5 relates a lot to the way I operate as an extroverted version of them, because 5 has a line to 8 and a line to 7. And 8 has a wing of 7 and a line to 5. So there are definite similarities, but how we go about it doing is macro versus micro. Small motors, one way to look at it. Like I always think 5Z can do all that little detail. Yeah, let me play tetherball or play tennis or do something big with large motor. Small motor is always going to be not my strength, to put it mildly, but I love those details. But amassing them, another story. So what you're going to be able to see, going back again with your own Tritype, is do you have those sets of fears? Now, the little individual videos that you can get that are now, instead of 65, they're on sale for 45. You get your version. When I go through Tritype, I do it from every perspective. So you see the collage, you see this chart, you see the passion, fixation, and conviction. And as I said, the holy idea, the holy virtue, and the holy action, which is the only way to neutralize your Tritype when it's inflamed. When it's on fire and overreacting, you can't just tell it to stop because it's a defense strategy. Instead, you have to look at the holy qualities or the higher ideal, whatever word you want to use for the higher expression of the type. And that's where it can really make a difference. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Okay, Sarah.
Hi, I'm familiar with the Enneagram, but new to actually diving in. And it's a rabbit hole, and I'm at the edge, and I'm about to start sliding. I was just
very brave to be in this class.
I was just at the end of May doing some Myers-Briggs work with Personality Hacker. I was at their live event, and of course, there are some folks who know Enneagram also, and I'm like, I'm so frustrated about my Enneagram type. I don't know what I am. I can't figure it out. And somebody said, object relations, look it up. And I did, and I'm like, I think I know my core type now, but now I want to know everything else.
Well,
so
hold on one second. Object relations were what we looked at with the types, just like Hornadians, we looked at the types and which could be which. Well, the same thing is true with object relations, but it's not like a mandatory way of describing the types because the variances, the variables are based on the tritype, but it's gotten you in the right direction. And
Right. Yeah. And
tritypes
so,
should see the object relations of all three.
right. So I think I'm narrowing it down, and I know my best fit Myers-Briggs type, which wasn't the type I thought it was for 25 years, because I got introduced to this stuff in college, but everything was like quick and dirty questionnaires on the internet, and that's a long time ago now. So, you know,
What
the
did you
Myers,
come out? I've taught Myers-Briggs for years. I just worth correlating them.
by questionnaire, I show up as introverted because I don't endorse being, you know, a social butterfly. I don't endorse feeling like comfortable in my relations with people. And intuitive, I worry a lot about how people are gonna like feel about me if I make a personal decision. So I typed out as a feeler and then a perceiver. But it turns out that by conversational profiling, I'm actually an ENTP. You know, yeah, and it like my profiler like gave me at least 3 lines of very convincing evidence that, you know, that I'm an extrovert. Like that blew my mind. I'm an extrovert.
Well, you raise your hand, you're on immediately. That's usually an extrovert too. But having said that, it's the way those 3 types, the first 3 types in Myers-Briggs come together, because the 4th factor, perceiving and judging, is just how you execute the
Right.
So really it's the ENT that becomes important.
Yeah.
To be concerned about how people see you, it's usually the 6. And it's very hard for a 6 to recognize themselves in the definitions that are available because they're focused on the struggle of the 6, but only on 3 archetypes of 6. And all 9 types have 9 basic archetypes, but they were lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. So if the 6 is good at figuring out solutions, especially if they have a high IQ or they're street smart, then they don't know that they're doubting their knowledge and they're questioning, and they don't know that. But you just said it twice just since we've talked.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's like, I know I would, is there like conversational profiling for the Enneagram as well? Because
Well, I've done 40 years of research on what language the types use.
and is that in your tests, like the
I ask you your words, but it'll tell you if you should consider 6 or 9 in your tritype. It'll give you a message, because it isn't just what you choose, it's when you choose it. So when I deliver I don't personally, when I created the test, I put in, or got this master programmer, I didn't do it. I said, this is what I noticed in person with thousands and thousands of people for many, many years. So 4 years ago, during COVID, because of COVID, I found someone that was really qualified that could do that. And so he programmed in what I noticed in person, because I would put things in front of people. I created physical cards as well. And then what people did with those cards, they actually do online, because but what I did differently is I gave 3 cards for each Enneagram type, and you have to stack them in the order of dominance for you. So this test is highly individualized because it's starting with your first choice cards, then your second choice cards, and your third choice cards are there. But I didn't ask any more questions, because if you do 3 rounds of the same thing, people just start saying, I'm this, that, and they don't care. It's just something I've learned doing research. So, but I give you all of them. So at the end of the test, you get like a whole panel of tabs that you can click on. And there's one that's called Show Answers, and it'll show you exactly what you chose when. So you don't have to try and remember. And as a result, someone might come out like a 469 and another person a 469, but they chose different cards, different 4 cards, different 6 cards, and different 9 cards. And those all tell very important stories about the type that I've learned over the years. And the other thing is that I do it with the instincts as well. With everything, it's like 10 tests in one. If you have a meeting with me, the data is still there. You can look at it, the answer to your questions, what words you impulsively just added. But otherwise, it's not just a single test. It's saying, okay, in these circumstances, what do you do? And what about this circumstance? Okay, you chose this first choice card as your 3 card, but when you're given the chance to choose between another 3 card, you made your second choice card your first card. And that tells the computer what it's tracking is, oh, different opinion, changed your mind on the dominance. And what it tells me is 2 things, like why you would choose one card over another, but the computer picks up all those patterns and then alerts you. And you could have no messages, you could have 1 message or 2, and you could have in excess of almost 50 messages, but I had it stop at 7 because 7 was like a good number. 1 wasn't enough. People wouldn't pay attention to the special notice. And then 25 messages was overkill. People just go, well, what am I? Well, it's telling you, but you might not want to know it. But you have, okay, you have this pattern, this pattern, this pattern. But with 7, it will identify the key things you should look at.
That's
And
great.
so
Yeah.
I had an online test for many years, but I didn't do the same level of feedback to the client.
So yeah, it's been a while since I've looked for your online test. So the one that's there now is new and is all this new and improved?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's exciting. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah,
but I've even updated it in the last month. So the answers that you get are more specific because it was hard for people to recognize when they could have 6 or 9 or both. And so like I changed that sentence. It means you have type 6, type 9, or both in your tritype. And then people, oh, okay, wait. Yeah, I do have 9. It's right there in my banner at the top, the blue banner. So what I'm saying is that you got to read the notices and open your mind to the possibility of what it's mentioning, because it's not by chance. You had to hit a lot of markers for it to show up. But there are exceptions. Sometimes there'll be kind of the contrary version of the 5 that will have 6 cards. And I know those exceptions, and it's worth looking at, but it'll still show you if you made different choices at different times, which lets you know that there's an important factor you can add to your understanding of your type.
that's great. Yeah. And so the one like question that I mean, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this. For the last 20 years, I've taken mood stabilizing medication, and I feel like myself. Like it's not like antidepressants can make you feel flat. It's like I feel like I can be myself. I feel like I can worry less about what other people think of me. Not that I don't worry about it at all, but I worry less. And so I'm assuming that the computer can pick up the patterns anyway. Like that I'm not messing up results by having, been in an improved mental state for 20 years.
No, but there are things that do happen when moods are stabilized, but the unstabilized mood also isn't fully you either. So the idea is to get what emerges when you put all those things together, kind of like what tri-type states.
Okay.
And what type did you identify with when you couldn't make up your mind?
That back 20 years ago in college, the first type I ever identified with back in college
Did
when
you
I
know
was
the Enneagram?
medicated. I knew the Enneagram then, and I identified with 4, but I don't think that, I mean, I think that's probably a wing that I have. I mean, if the energy is there, but right now I am thinking that I have 9 pretty strongly, 3 mainly because I can't decide between 2 and 4. And, I used to just go for all the prizes, before I started pulling back and being so scared of what other people think. But,
When you
it's,
say
it's,
scared as often as you have,
say
you
again,
you say fear, worry, scared so much, and that is a natural set of vocabulary for the 6. And
for
the
the
6
6,
never, and they can think they're 4s.
right? Right now, I'm this, so like 9 and 3 are pretty clear. And the one I can't decide between is, okay, well, there's 6, which I recognize the chameleonic quality and the emphasis on fear, but I may be playing up that fear because I started talking about my 10-year-old function in Myers-Briggs, that extroverted feeling. It's in my back seat. It's an insecurity point, but I started talking about it. If you just got me talking, I don't know how quickly I would go to that.
Yeah, I need to move on because I want to
I'm
give.
so sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
Yes.
no, I just want to, it's just so important because I value what you have said, and your language is still that of a 6, and 6s have the most difficulty recognizing themselves.
Yes.
But really they're moving between 5 and 7 all the time, just all the time. So while I have.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm just saying, when you look at your results, look at the broader picture of 6. I did a whole section in my new book on things about 6 as examples. And maybe I just need to pull that out and just post it on my website, because there's so much of 6 that gets confused. And people say, well, I'm this, but I'm not that. The minute you say I'm not this, it's 6. Whereas 9 says, well, I'm this, but I can also be that. And that's 9. And that's why 6 and 9 have trouble. And if you have both 6 and 9 in your Tritype, then your heart type is very important, like I mentioned at the beginning. So I'm not saying you have to be a 6. I'm just saying my feedback on everything you've said is the way a 6 describes their journey.
Yeah, I'm definitely considering it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Katherine.
Thank you, Sarah. Evelyn?
This is Evelyn.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And that chart helps me with my question. And I did miss the first few minutes, but you said that 1, 3, 6 is your opposite. Could you say more about how do you find?
So if you look at it, you almost need to see it visually. Hold on.
Oh, now we can.
So if we look at the actual Enneagram symbol, if you look at the 8, I naturally can get to 9 through wing. I can get to 7 through wing. And I have the line to 5. And because I have 4 in the Tritype, I can get 5 is amplified because 8 has a line to 5, 7 has a line to 5, and 4 has a wing of 5. So 5 is prominent in the 4, 7, 8, even if 5 isn't one of your types. And that can happen the reverse with people that are 7s and how it plays out. But the important point here is that I get to 2 directly from a line. So which types do I have to do an extra move? And it's 1, 3, and 6. See, I have to go through 7 or through 5 to get to 6.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So everything's based on those lines. Now,
Absolutely.
because I have 7 in the Tritype, I can get there, but 8's still dominant over 7.
Okay. Well,
Good
just
question.
my other question though is there anything in the diagram that takes you more quickly to find the opposite? I mean, thank you for that. I think that helps a lot. But
yes and no. I'd have to go into it, but
okay.
if you notice, it's in the same center. So if we look at another tri-type. Let's go to the 478. The 136 is my opposite, but it's in the same initiating 3 sector. And you'll find interesting patterns like the 458, the equivalent is the 269. That's what they get to last. So there are wonderful patterns to be able to see. So depending on your tri-type, you look at what you just can take a crayon on the Enneagram symbol or a pen and mark what you can get access to with your wings and your lines, and then do the same with each type in your tri-type, and it shows up.
Okay.
It's like really fast if you just have this symbol to look at.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that 2 circles in is going to show you on the Tristar diagram what your
Well, yeah,
opposite
it's
is.
the way I just showed you, but
Yeah.
I need to say more about how to look at that diagram.
Okay, okay.
I'm gonna be doing that in the class, but
I
I just didn't have time today on this free event.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, yes. Anna Grace?
Hello. Thank you very much, by the way, for this. This was very informative. I thought I knew a lot about Enneagram, and after sitting here, I was like, wow, there's so much more, and with the tri-types and stuff. So I guess my question, kind of 2-part. One, where would you suggest, because a lot of what you talked about was new, like the just all of the charts and everything, like where would you suggest starting? And then also you mentioned in your specific videos, and I was curious, like how in depth does it go, and would one of the videos be a starting point, or would that possibly be too advanced to start with? Does that make
Well,
sense?
as we speak, I'm going to be posting next introduction to the Enneagram and a mini introduction on the tri-types of each type. And I'm going to do it 2 ways. I'm going to do the whole set, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to let people purchase just an individual type. It's ready, AD, right? Completely ready to go?
Yes, it's ready.
Yeah, thank you. What he did is he took other work that I've done and pulled it, because I do a lot of advanced work. I'm just fascinated with systems. You give me any correlated everything. So it can seem overwhelming, but in this session, I just wanted you to understand the confusion that different schools of thought on the Enneagram have. And it's just that they learn a specific set of data and then reproduce that. The only difference with me is I went after everything and did the research. And then when Naranjo validated the research and felt that qualitative research works best with all the soft sciences, which psychology and any type of personality system is, it's more discovering common denominators. It's not true false. I did a research with the subtypes in 1998 where I found statistically that there were 4 categories. One was a catch-all of what people do and don't like in relationship. So we can just put that aside, but otherwise there were 3 patterns that match the instincts exactly. But that was done with UC Davis. And then there's another validated study on the lexicon that emerged, which, as I said, started before the Enneagram. So maybe as long as 50 years ago is when I started it. And it was validated when one of my proteges, who works for the University of Oklahoma, did a lexicon research. So he mimicked what I did and sent it out to new people and came up with the same answer. So that's the trouble with qualitative, is you have to have the same exact conditions and see if the same discoveries emerge. And most people like doing the quantitative, the true false. And but as with soft sciences, there's always so much more to learn, which is why I continue to do studies. And everyone, if you go to my homepage in the upper left corner under what's new, I have 2 research studies going on right now, and I'd love your feedback. And they're quite short. and they say so much about the types. And you can take the Tritype lexicon and MBTI research, and you can do it in 5 minutes if you want, or 10 minutes if you need a little more thinking. And I ask on there how certain you are. So if you're not certain of an answer, don't worry, just say you're uncertain, because there are many other patterns. And I find out who says uncertain. It's just everything means something on one level. So I really would appreciate it. I could not tell you about the types, what I know now, if I hadn't had people like yourself share their experience. And I had to get all 9 types and all 3 subtypes and all variables to even discover the lexicon. So I really, really appreciate group participation, community participation, which is why I did this event, to get you started understanding the symbol.
So
But
at the beginning of
that's-
this thing.
Yeah, so it'll be out. You should see Introduction to the Enneagram and Mini Tritypes, I think is the title I came up with. And
So it does include the Tritypes.
Yeah, I'm a
'Cause
minor.
Since you asked at the beginning, you were like, how sure are you of them? And I was sure, but now I'm like, maybe not.
And it's easy for us to make a mistake. It really is, especially if
Okay.
we have a line of connection. Like I, as an 8, I have a line of connection to 2. But in the heart center, the way your lines are like the kind of the piston to the Enneagram moving around, beginning out of 9 into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and back. And then the lines are moving towards a line and back, towards a line and back, towards a line and back, towards a line and back. And so if you think of the type as point 1, there are 8 movements to the first wing and back, later wing and back. And by first, what do I mean? I'll continue with the same analogy. As an 8, the earlier wing would be the 7, the later wing would be 9. So the way it works, it goes from point 8 to 7 and back to point 8 to 9 and back. And then it moves based on those lines then to the next type. So it's really in motion. These are not static. They're not fixed. And the symbol that both Chazo and Gurdjieff use is the Enneagram that recognizes motion. And it's the triad 369. For every action, there's a reaction and a return to neutral. And the 142857 is just mapping change in the universe. So you combine them with the circle, which is the whole and the oneness, and you get the Enneagram of transformation, which is why that symbol was used by both men.
Thank you.
Miriam? Yeah.
Hi, Katherine. Hi,
Thank you,
everyone.
Anna Grace.
Yeah, I'm very interested in taking the class actually, and I guess we will study more in depth what you already said today. But for the mathematic part, I must admit I'm just a bit phased with how I land, because with my 738, I'm like, oh, so the core of my tritype is in another center of intelligence, and the addition of it is another center intelligence. And I'm already a countertype. So I feel like, oh my God, where am I going to land in this? And what does it do to my core type?
It gives a greater understanding of your version of 7. So it means that you're still assertive, but you're moving towards the future, which 7 does anyhow. But you need to end up with something meaningful that isn't like emotionally, intellectually meaningful as much as it is represented in the world. And that's what the 378 accomplishes, being in the 3 triad. So it's a niche, think of it as initiating triad rather than just limited to type 3. Does that make sense? It's just they're mirror images, just like the instincts are mirror images on top of the original Enneagram. And a lot of people don't realize that. That's all subtypes are, is like the difference between self-preservation and gut. Self-preservation is the primitive version of the gut. The heart type, what's the heart center? What's the primitive version is the sexual instinct, like overdoing the need for rapport, intimacy, oneness. And then the same with the head type. The head type is just, the higher center. The lower functioning is the social instinct. Well, are you for me? Are you against me? Who's with whom? Where am I going to learn things? Who's my enemy? So that's all emerging in the lower functioning. So we have to remember the subtype is the more primitive expression. So I use the same exact symbol. You might remember this with the subtypes. And I have one chart that shows how they overlay. But if you don't know that social and the head center are the same, just higher and lower functioning, which most people don't, unless you've been exposed to what I have. And if you haven't been able to talk to Naranjo for an extended length of time, you wouldn't know. But I learned because he loved the research, and I was in a 10-day class with him. And then I saw him each time he came to a conference. And then we talked further. And I introduced the tri-center and 3 types, which I called it originally. But he thought it was an interesting notion, but he had not thought about it. But he added the countertypes, which came from me, from him. So he had a counterphobic 6. In 1994, I learned everything was stacked. Your types are stacked. That's your tritype. Your instincts are stacked. That's your instinctual stacking. And then you had an identification with each type in your tritype, with each instinct. And the identification is the nurture, how we experienced it. And so that's a factor as well. And I looked for this, I thought it'd be really elegant if we just stacked your types and stacked your instincts, and they'd be a perfect match. So my first type is 8, yours is 7, but then we have to look at social 7, social 3, and social 8 first. And that came out in the research. I just thought, it'd be great. I'm a sexual 8, a self-pres 7, and a social 4. That's the way mine come together. And it does. And it's definitely true when you're working with wonderful nuances about the types. But the research revealed that the instinct was far more influential than the type. And that was not taught up until my research. It wasn't known. So basically, and most people didn't even know subtypes because they came down through the Jesuit line and weren't exposed to the subtypes. So of all the people out there that knew the Enneagram in 1994 with that first conference, 75% did not know subtypes. 25 people that were in the Berkeley area or associated with Naranjo at a later date did know, or had gotten Helen's book, because Helen had put in a paragraph of Naranjo for each of the subtypes in her book. If you got that book, you understood subtypes to some degree, but Helen taught that you could use that subtype, the energy of it, to work with your passion. And yet it's the other way around. The subtype is saying, danger, 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 take care of this now, which is why we go into action trying to handle something, because our instinct has been disrupted. Like if you're status quo and you're at ease when people are socially relating in a positive manner and you're enjoying your group, no one's going to see that you need it to go a certain way. It'll just be pleasant for you. But if things are boring or going away that was not agreed upon and not moving forward, then you're going to want to have some control over the group. And I remember in the class we were in, I said that the way your tritype does it is they'll want to influence the person in charge. And maybe they're in charge, maybe they're not. 7s don't always have to be in charge, but 7 is the top of the social hierarchy. And so 5 is like looking at the social groups and deciding whether they're going to join or they'll still be distant in some way. 6 is saying, oh, which group do I need to join? I'm not sure. And the 7 is saying, yeah, I'll be in charge of the group and then it'll run the way I like. Or the 7 will influence the person in charge and not have the full burden of running everything. And you won't see the 7, the 3, or the 8 in the same way as you will when that social instinct is threatened. And then you're going to assert. And you're going to want it to move forward in a particular way, and you're not going to be so easygoing. High side is you're the Tritype that has the vision for the world, and they're citizens of the world, the social 7. And so they can see all the possibilities and all the variables and how they all come together. I mean, that's why I love the Enneagram, because it was the best system for personality diversity. Like when I'd go into the Federal Reserve or Schwab or these companies that had very narrow views about the way people should be, they were big enough that I said, well, don't you understand diversity? Oh yeah, we have this diversity, that diversity. I go, well, this is personality diversity. Oh, okay. And then they were more open, but it just shows you that it's really depends on the environment you're in. Now, small companies, that was no problem, or working in nonprofits, or even working with voir dire. I've been working directly with attorneys and who they should have on their juries. So it's like jury selection. Well, I could tell you who would be kept, who the other opposing counsel would delete, and take their opportunity to not accept a juror, and who they'd want it to be. And you only have 3 strikes. So you're left with the rest of the jurors. And I thought, this is really great. I'm helping the underdog get their fair share in a settlement. Then I realized, wait, you could have someone on the defense that's all out for themselves. And I'm governing how they're going to do that by giving them data. And I said, no more. That's the dark side for me. No more jury selection. But I did basically, if you think of a field, I've taught the Enneagram to it, whether it's the prison system or whether it's schools, like private schools would bring me in, church groups, businesses, like Team 5 of the Federal Reserve. Janet Yellen was in my 2003 class at the Federal Reserve. So anything you can imagine, the Enneagram has been applied to, you just might not know it. So group dynamics are one of my favorites because I had to manage so many people throughout my career, and I knew typologies from the time I was a senior in high school. Actually, to be honest, it was by the age of 7, because those little books came out there was a little book at the cash register that said face reading. And there's one that said how to know what people are thinking based on their expressions. And they were really early books. And they're like, someone got me one of the older books, but it was all moldy, mildewy, and I'm allergic to mildew, so I couldn't keep it. But I recently got the one on numerology that I got when I was like 8 years old. So I always got those. I was always curious. It's very common for people that have ENTP or other factors that would make them curious. So yes, it's not going to throw you off, just like when you understood what happened with your particular countertype. It's like that. It's revealing something else about you. In fact, did I give you the chart that had the countertype stacked? So each type, the common type, the stereotype, the first countertype, and the extreme countertype?
I don't remember getting that chart. I took the class though, but I don't remember the chart.
Yeah, I should have given you that handout. Yeah, let me know and email me and I'll get it to you, because it really helps to see what's the stereotype of each instinct, like with 7 or 8 or 9 or 1. And if you look at how many countertypes you have, it really shapes the independent approach. Just like my Tritype, you can't get me to narrow things down. It's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And you go big. you and I share 7 and 8, but because you have 3, you need performance. Whereas I'm going to keep changing things. I'm interested in the evolving process. And you're interested in having an end result as you evolve everywhere. But you need the finished product more than I do. What MBTI do you identify with?
ENFP T.
Yeah, so people, you know what you feel and you want to understand what other people feel. As an ENFP, I know what other people feel, literally, and I don't like it, but I don't know what I feel. I have to think about it and say, oh, wait, no, yeah, that person did that, and so did that, and even that child did that, and that man did that, that woman did that. They all did that. What do they have in common? They're all human. Oh, I must do that. Then I look to see how I do it. Whereas a ENFP says, and that's also 8, but ENFP says, wait, I'm feeling this. Other people must be feeling this. And then you look out to see what they're feeling and to inquire. So it's just, we're both outward. Whereas the 5 and 4 begin with their own, well, the 4 begins with their own feelings. Oh, I noticed this and that and that. Oh, okay. So I'm human. So I feel that. So other people feel that. And then they look out. And it's not one's right and one's wrong. It's just, where do we begin? Where's our point of reference begin? And the 5 is thinking, well, that's goes together. That seems to be consistent. Oh, that model matches the big picture and the little picture and the way they connect. And conceptually, I can see that. And there's a logical way that all the parts fit together with the whole. And that's 5. But it's first looking at the data separate from the self. And whereas 4 looks at everything based on themselves. And the 8's looking everything out there, and then we come to those patterns. So there's so much we can know. It's just no one mapped it. All I've done is taken the time to do the studies and map it, and then unbelievable support that's enabled me to create the charts and things so other people can see it. But yes, it is overwhelming at first, but just like the Enneagram was overwhelming at first, wasn't it? And so each time you add something, then you can just add another nuance, another specialization, another way that you are an individual. Because if you just include the types, the tritypes, and the subtypes, and all the permutations, you get to almost, well, somewhere around 1,700 variations. So we're not like these cookie cutter combinations, they're variables. But knowing which variables, okay, how are Northern Europeans different from South Americans? Well, the climate, where in South America? Let's say Central, very different climate, different way that you handle life, even in Northern and Southern California. I grew up in Newport Beach, beach city, everyone's outside for everything. I moved up here when I was 22 to Northern California and everything was inside. I'm thinking, okay, let's go get an ice cream cone. Southern California had 31 flavors, standard, right? I try to get ice cream and they didn't have 31 flavors when I first moved up here 50 years ago. And you could get chocolate or vanilla, strawberry if you were lucky. So it's just, and that's just, 400 miles apart. But then, now that we're global, there's things everywhere and brands that have unfolded, and thanks to the 3s and 7s and 8s, your Tritype that made that happen. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes. All right.
As you're alluding to, like, I'm interested in this material, and my retention and understanding are so poor just going through the video. So the Tristar stuff will that be in the definitive Enneagram?
It'll be in the definitive and it will be in the Tritype book.
In the Tritype book.
Updating the Tritype book too.
Okay, great. All right, so I know where to go because
Yeah, you know what? In the meantime, because I just want people to understand this for their own personal awareness and growth, I put a lot of it on the Tritype page at katherinefauvre.com. So katherinefauvre.com/Tritype. If you go to that page and go to the end, I do a whole explanation. Now, it might still be overwhelming. It's easier to do it in a class where I take one little piece by piece, but there's a lot there if you want to see it written.
Yeah. No, I don't think I'll be overwhelmed as long as I can see it and read it.
Yeah, I see that you're visual. Yeah, I have to see it too. I have to see it and do it. Like I have to say, okay, no, let me do it. Let me do it. Don't help me, because I need the kinesthetic as well. I'm like the gorilla with the suitcases that's throwing them around. It's like the monkey trying to figure out how to do something. Not quite like the crows, who are there's a flock of crows that has adopted me, and they're good at that small motor, and they knock on my door for their peanuts, and one of them's friends with a squirrel, and I have a screen door, and the crow is knocking on the screen to get my attention, and the squirrel in the meantime is putting his little hand under the screen because he knows where I keep the peanuts. So I'm thinking, God, they're very brave to come right to my door, because a crow can't fly out easily because it's a wall on one side, and then you have to get up and out. So they have to hop up and fly away. So the fact that they even do it is extraordinary. But when you understand how smart crows are, it makes sense. When I fell and fractured my back and injured my ribs and broke my foot, it was the crows that sent the alarm. And there's only two. If you ever notice, there are two crows on your street, wherever you live in the world, except Iceland. That's their territory. They're like sergeants at that space, but they called the other crows, and the whole flock of 21 birds came, and I was on my way to my car when I hit a pothole just walking, and it crumbled underneath me. And it took me a while to figure out how to get up, because I hurt my ribs. My back's not doing what I expect. Oh, I can't push off on my foot. And so it took me about 10 minutes to figure out how to get up, which I did, but they ran the alarm until all the birds came, and they kept doing it. And then when I started to get up, their cawing went, like they were watching if I was going to be able to get up, because they consider me a part of their flock because I give them peanuts. And then when I walked up the stairs, they moved, they all flew to the building across from me so they could see me. And they know I'm here. Like a lot of times they'll be running on the wires trying to get my attention. Hey, Katherine, I'm so cute. Don't you have some peanuts for me? And I always give peanuts to the whole flock, because they're not allowed to just take the peanuts for themselves. There's a very strong social hierarchy. And so I always give enough for all 22 birds now, and then they come, and then they have to be judicial, but they'll hide it and steal from each other. That's different. But you can't be a sergeant like version of a crow and just take the peanuts for yourself. You got to let the higher ups come in. And so they all do food. And I didn't know this at first, but I had a bunch of broken toys and kind of candy wrappers at my front door. And I asked my neighbor, I go, have you had a child visiting recently that was trying to leave me a little present? He goes, no. And I go, oh, okay. But then I thought, that's got to have something to do with the crows. And I went on the internet, and they do. They leave little shiny things, things that they think are like little treasures. Like there was a heart. I'll show you one of the things they left me. It's a broken little heart.
That's adorable.
But to them, it's shiny, and they could pick it up, and that was at my door. But it could also be a broken little car or a wrapper. Yeah, they're pretty amazing. They're so smart. They can do what a 7-year-old child can do. So anyhow, I appreciate your feedback. Please take those studies. Anything that you add, any comments that you make, I pay attention to. And then I share with everyone else. Okay?
Would you just explain to me quickly how you knew that I was visual?
Because I saw what you access. So that's another system. Remember, give me a system, any system. You look up. And fives usually go interior and just look here. And you do that as well, but you look up to find what you want bigger, and that's a visual person. An auditory person looks for the sound that's associated with the picture. And a kinesthetic person looks down to feel it in their body. And then there are other, and we can be the reverse. It's NLP. We can do things the reverse of what we think. Like I access my memories looking to the left. In fact, if it's a specific memory, I go up because I'm visual. But if it's my filing cabinet that I have because of the gift for the dyslexia, I can go through all the clients that I've known for 40 years, or people even before that, the facial expression that they used and what it meant. And people say, well, do you know this tritype that's this Myers-Briggs with this instinctual stacking? And I go, hold on. I go through my, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they seem to be more the 378, but there were some 278s. And it's an expression. So accessing visual is looking up, and hearing a sound is through this region, and looking down is both what's happening in our body, what we're feeling on a kinesthetic level, but also if we have internal dialogue, if we're rehearsing what we're saying, or if you have the type of dyslexia that I have, I'm saying, wait, what's that word? Is it, oh yeah, that's known as a fear of, and my brain is thinking, oh, it's intimacy or a fear of commitment. And my mouth might say a fear of committimacy. And so I have a whole set of language, but it's like a great word because, yeah, they relate to it. I said, well, I didn't mean it. Is that a word? Go, well, not really, but it is now. My friends and my boys just know the whole language, but I have word retrieval because of that word processing style that I have. So I can come up with new words, and I don't really mean it. I wish, just like, what is it? So I can have a delay there. On the other hand, if I see an expression, I have a permanent memory. It's like a visual memory for expression that I, like any chart that I make, I can go and look on the chart and find the answer because I created the chart. Or I might know that, there's something in particular about the triad, and I know, yeah, it's in this third of the book, and I just have a couple pages to go. I may not know it's page 109. I'm not that good, but I know where it feels in my body as a gut type. Yeah, that I was holding the book like this. So yeah, it's in the middle. And then I go from there. Or if you think about it, when you're driving and you're going someplace and you had to make a right turn, then a left turn, and then you went straight for a while, then you had to turn right, and then you have to go home. And like when I'd be traveling with a friend or a husband, then they'd say, wait, don't we need to go this way? And I go, no, we need to go this way. And they go, what's this way? I go, this way. And well, what do you mean by that? I mean, well, we moved this way when we turned to get off. So the reverse is this way. So I can know kinesthetically which way without knowing. On the other hand, I'm terrible with directions, because I like the way the maps are now when they're warning you something's coming. But I don't, if someone says, okay, you do this, and then you do that, and you do that, and no, wait a minute. Floating facts, need a pattern. No, just tell me the right on this, left on that. And so it might be 10 steps, but I can do that. But if it's look for the safe way and do this, it's like my brain wants to look for the safe way instead of looking for the signs. And so we all have wonderful patterns like that. We just don't know what they are. When I was in 7th grade, I had a math teacher that was a 5, and every day to calm the crazy, wild 12-year-olds down, he would do a math problem. So 2 times 36 divided by 3 plus 18, and he just kept going. And then we had to write down the answer and turn it in at the beginning of class. And then we were all quiet. And I never got it right. I go, what? Well, let's see. It feels like about this amount. And then I'd write that answer. And then like a couple weeks later, he said, Katherine, can you see me after class? And I go, oh yeah, he's going to tell me I never get those brain twisters right. He said, Katherine, I need to tell you, you're a mathematical intuitive. I go, what? No, you got the wrong person. I never got it right. He goes, do you know that it's statistically impossible to be that close to the answer and not have it right? 2 weeks in a row. And I go, well, no, if you say so, but I didn't really believe him until later when I was told again that I feel an amount, whether it's pouring dishwasher detergent or sensing what a price is. And I'm an intuitive, but I use the sensing as my auxiliary, and being a gut type, I feel it. So whatever gift we have or what we perceive as a learning disability, there's a corresponding gift. We just don't know what they are. But when we find out what they are, it really makes us appreciate our designated disability in a new way. It really, really does. Both my boys had the ADHD and the dyslexia, and I found out what their strengths were and helped them work with their strengths to handle the problem of what was hard for them. And they ended up both very confident and competent, whereas they could have felt like, yeah, I don't see it that way. Okay, so that's why I love personality diversity. I love this system, and I know it is overwhelming to say so much in this class, but I'm just want to give you a taste of it so you can begin to look at the types in a broader way and to make more sense of the testing instrument that I created, because it's picking up all those nuances, but you do need someone to explain it, because I have to see the emotions. Like a lot of times people will book a session with me and they'll want to explain ahead of time. Well, Katherine, I think I'm this. This person said I'm this type. This other person who's an expert said this type. And then these people said this. And I was this way. And my parents say this. And they'll want to tell me everything. And I have to say, I'm not even going to read this. And they go, why not? And I said, because I want to see what you believe. And you have to tell me in real time. And then I can see what the face is doing as those sentences emerge. And the 3, 6, and 9 in particular, and of those 3, the 6 and then 9, will over-explain as one of their strategies. Why does the 6 give so much explanation? There's a very important reason. They want to give you as much data as possible so the person analyzing them will give them the best answer. But what happens is they're so fixated on the data that they're no longer open to what the data reveals, because they've come to a conclusion. So head types, and it's different for each center, but head types will try to assess things, weigh and measure pros and cons, come up with the best answer they can. And then for that period of time, they're fixed, and that's their truth. But then if something emerges that throws the deck of cards into the air, then the head types go, whoa, wait a minute. No, that's too much. I can't know that. But they just have to sort the deck again. You could sort it by color. You could sort it by number. You could sort it by suits. You could sort it by like a flush. There's many ways you can sort a deck of cards. So the head types then sort new, add that new piece of data, then there's that truth, which they stick to until they have a really good reason to change it. Now, gut types, they do it on a visceral level. Yeah, it doesn't feel right. And we're not talking about what our heart feels. We're talking about, it doesn't feel right in my body. It's almost like we took a situation out here, we put it in our body. Yeah, no, it's spit out. Or, yeah, that matches. And then we think of it intellectually. gut types, and then we go to our heart. As a type, as a gut type. And a heart type, if it doesn't feel right in here, if they don't like the answer, they're not open to the answer because it has to feel good. And really, you can only do that in a session where you can understand and tell them what their emotions are saying in contradiction to their words, because we all do that. We just don't know it. And even if you learn mind over matter, there's still little micro expressions that will give us away. So people in special ops have had counter interrogation work done where they're just, no matter what, they can have a story or a bland face or not give anything away, because if the enemy, let's say, says, well, are the weapons at this location or this location, if someone's surprised they know it, they might have a quick little movement, and that's inner knowing. And if they say, oh, yeah, we already know the weapons are at B facility and there's no motion, okay, that's probably not where it is. Oh, sorry, I had that wrong. I mean, it's at point C, and there's just that tiny little, it's like saying, yeah, right. So there's just, and I'm not talking about the critical look. That's like, you're going to have to prove that, or I don't believe that. And that's why 4s, 1s, and 7s have the eyebrow, but 1s in particular. But this little inner knowing, like a little right through here, it's confirmation. So there's wonderful things about all these systems if you put them together. Have any of you ever watched the behavior panel, I think it's called? Oh, it's 4 specialists, 2 of them that do interrogation and counter interrogation. Well, 3 of them have worked for the government one way or another. And one is just that ENFP 7, just like, oh, well, this is what people are feeling. And he's worked with leaders, major leaders, government leaders, and has also worked with using theater and the way you actualize physical gestures, illustrators. Now, anyone that's an ENFP or an E is going to usually have big illustrators. That's another thing. So mine are pretty giant. I know that I have to remember to, Katherine, keep your hands down, because I have to say, yeah, AD, can you kind of get the big hand out of there? Because he might have a picture where I'm like this. And I have to, it's like, it's just too big. It's like, and people before me said it's very hard to find a picture of me smiling when I'm teaching, because I'm deep in thought about what I'm teaching, but he finds them. So anyhow, I wish you all the best. And if there's something you're interested in, do open the email, because I'll always have something dramatically reduced, because I know not everybody can afford the full cost of the courses. So I always want to make it available after the fact. And I give away free information on the types or videos. Like I'm interviewing everyone that I've known for at least 30 years and some longer. And I wish I had more of my interview with David Daniels and Naranjo was all in person, no recording, and the same. But I do have a Chazo's teachers, and one that did his 40-day training for him and did the domains of consciousness. And I lived on Maui for a year, and I learned everything about Eureka too, and went to a Chazo's intensive. It was extraordinary. I just love sharing that information. So that video, I'm doing a whole series just for fun, really not just for fun, to get the history out there to people that didn't get to experience it in real time. Because it's fascinating when you understand more about how things emerged and then why there are 4 distinct, and maybe more if we look at it deeply. There might be as many as 5 or 6 disseminations of the Enneagram. And I'm the 4th simply because I added the Tritype, but I also incorporated Trifix, subtype, everything else. And so anyone that has had all the cross training would be the 4th dissemination, even if they started with an earlier dissemination. And in a way, Don Riso, when he added the levels of health, which are phenomenal. When you look at like the level of imbalance, which is level 4, and that's when our type or our tritype is kind of off balance and we're agitated. And then the level of overcompensation, 3, 4, 5, and then the level further down of violation, and the way we will do that is really indicative of type. You get to see how any human being or any system has those levels, and then you can apply it. The only place where people get confused is that when Don came out with the levels, he looked at it more as a specific level, meaning that when you were at your highest level, it was level 1, and at your lowest level was level 9. But where it got confusing is that he would take the lines of connection with the missed training on it, because he came down through the Jesuits, Don, and he added that the vocabulary he chose was the high side of your line of integration. And when you're going down the levels, the low side was your point of disintegration. So just modify it to know that you're always integrating on the high side. You've got to look at the ego can't go to the low side of one part of the character and the high side of another. You're either all up or all down. And that's from Naranjo and David Daniels and other psychiatrists I've worked with. It's like the ego can't do it. Yeah, maybe they'll find in the future they can, but it's not split that way. But Naranjo did say he entertained the idea. But then he realized that if you had one that was integrating and one disintegrating, that would be a dialectic system, an either or. And for those of you interested, the Enneagram is a trialectic system. So there has to be that third force. And so he said he just threw it out the same day he thought of it. But Robert Oakes, Bob Oakes, learned the Enneagram from Naranjo, and he liked the idea of sin and redemption. So he taught it to the Jesuits and those that were studying. So Patrick O'Leary and Jerry Wagner, they were in his first group. So they didn't know subtype and didn't know that integration disintegration was a problem. And neither did Helen Palmer, because she learned from the misunderstanding. And I remember Naranjo saying to me, Katherine, can you explain to me why people that were in my first SAT group, where I never taught the subtypes, I never taught integration disintegration, why they came out with books now and they include it? And I said, yeah, I can figure that out. And he goes, enlighten me. And I said, well, no one published. You were the first to teach it in the US. They were there. And then they saw all these books come out that included it. So they assumed they just hadn't learned it. They self-taught by reading books with people who had included it and then added it. He said, that's why you're good at qualitative research. But it's like, didn't match to him that like Sandra Maitre and Almas would add it to their teachings when he didn't have it originally. So that's what happens when we're cross exposed to things. The high side is we learn more things. The difficult side is if not everything we learn is true. So we just have to check it for ourselves in real time. You know, I knew I could go the low side of 2. And that research was not my low side, that it was fully engaged. And whereas the idea with 8 is that you drop into 5, you pull away, you act like a 5, but we don't act like another type. What we do is we have the energetic approach shifts in the way of dealing with things. So yeah, if I'm like not happy, I'm going to want to go do my own thing, my own way for sure. But I might be naturally moving out towards others as an 8, like when I'm not in defiance, I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. Or, yeah, you're great, I'm great, we're both great. Second thought, nah, neither of us are great. But that fluid part is just the 8 moving from 8 to 2, the 8 to 5 and back. You know, it's just that movement. Yeah, we're both great. That's it too. Never, no, we're not. You're, you know, I'm not, you're not, you know, on second thought, throw that out. And then new idea, new rule, new change. And that's just the dynamic part of 8. And so the lines of connection in the wings are like this combustion machine I was describing earlier, where you're going back and forth at the same time. You're going out. I need someone to animate that for me. And then that would be great. I need to find that person. If you know anyone, let me know. Because if people could see it, they would understand how it moves along the Enneagram and why we have some misunderstandings about the types. Okay. Thank you all so much. Hope to see you again in the future. Bye-bye.